The Gdang people are a linguistically identified ethnic group of related families sharing lengthy residence in the watershed of the Cagayan River, in northern Luzon, Philippines. Gdang speakers are reported to number around 30,000, plus another 6,000 genetically related Gdang speakers whose vocabulary is more than 80% identical. These two groups are often depicted in historic and cultural literature as a single population. Distinctions between the Christianized lowlanders and the non-Christian residents in the mountains appear to be ignored by many sources. There are both intriguing similarities and unreconciled differences in history, location, lifestyle and beliefs between these two related populations. The Gdang homelands. The Cagayan Valley is cut off from the rest of Luzon by ranges of high, rugged mountains to both the east and west, which meet at Balade Pass in the south near Baguio City, geographically within Benguet. Mary Cristina Breitzer reports the Gdang are found in northern Nueva Vizcaya, especially Bayombong, Solano, and Bagabag on the western bank of the Magat River, and Santiago, Angadanan, Corayan, and Reana Mercedes on the Cagayan River for Christian groups, and western Isabela along the edges of Kalinga and Bontoc, in the towns of Antartet, Dalag, and the barrios of Gamu and Tumauini for the non-Christian communities. The 1960 census reports that there were 25,000 Gdang, and that 10% or about 2,500 of these were non-Christian. There is a barangay named Gdang in Apari. The evidence is that Gdang have occupied this vast protected valley, in proximity to Ibanag, Itors, Yogad, Isnag, Malaweg, Bugklot and Aeta peoples for many hundreds of years. All these Cagayan Valley peoples share linguistic and cultural similarities, as well as much common history. Prehistory. Between 200 BC and 300 AD, colonizing expeditions of Indo-Malay peoples arrived along the northern coasts of Luzon. They found the Cagayan River watershed sparsely occupied by long-established Negrito-Ata peoples, while the hills were already populated by the more recently arrived Igorot. Unlike either the Aeta hunter-gatherers and Igorot terrace agriculturists, the Indo-Malay colonists practiced swidden farming, and developed successful littoral and riparian societies as well, all economies which demand low population density. Whenever there were population increases following economic success or continued in migration, these Indo-Malays were forced to move. Over many generations they spread inland along the Cagayan River and its tributaries. As Gdang occupy lands further away from the mouth of the river than most Indo-Malay groups, they may be considered likely to have been among the earliest to arrive. The Indo-Malay arrived in separate small groups during this half-millennium, undoubtedly speaking different dialects, while over time distance promoted linguistic differences. Still, descendants of this 500-year-long migration share elements of language, genetics, practices, and beliefs. Over the last century, ethnologists have recorded versions of a shared epic describing the arrival of the heroes Biwag and Malana, their adventures with magic crocodiles and depictions of riverside life among all the Cagayan Valley populations. Other cultural similarities include familial collectivism, dearth of endogamous practices, and marked indifference to conservation of assets. These behaviors tend to foster a high individual survival rate, but do relatively little to maintain cultural continuity. Historic records. Spanish occupation. The Gdang enter written history in 1608 when the Dominican order founded the mission of Saint Ferdinand in the Gdang community of Abuetan, Bolo, nearly 40 years after initial Spanish settlement in the Cagayan region. 1621 saw the Gdang revolt, led by Felipe Catabay and Gabriel Daag. The Gdang revolt may have been spurred by the imposition of of tribute, like Magalat's rebellion in Tuguegarao a generation earlier. Records say the residents burned the village and the church, then removed to the foothills west of the Malug River. A generation later, Gdang returnees at the invitation of Fray Pedro de Santo Tomas re-established the Bolo community, although it was now on the opposite side of the Cagayan River from the original village. The Gdang revolt effectively ended with the first mass that was held by the Agustinians on the 12th of April 1739 in Bayombong, Nueva Vizcaya, the supposed final stronghold of the Gdangs. We may presume this began the distinction between the Christianized and non-Christian Gdang. The Bolo area Gdang sought refuge with the mountain tribes who had consistently refused to abandon traditional beliefs and practices for Catholicism. The Igorots had killed Father Esteban Marin in 1601 and had subsequently waged a guerrilla resistance after Captain Mateo de Aranada burned their villages in response. It is likely the mountain tribes accepted the Gdang as allies against the Spanish, although the Gdang refused to grow rice in terraces. The mountaineers taught the Gdang to build homes in the trees. Many Gdang eventually returned to the valley, however, and accepted Spain and the Church in order to reclaim their former lifestyle. The Catholic Church continued to forcefully proselytize in the Cagayan Valley, reaching the furthest uphill point at Aritao by 1609. The Itwi mission initially baptized Ishani and Ilongo, but by the 1630s services were being held in Bayombong. The Spanish administration of Governor Dasmariñas during this period sent several expeditions into the upper Magat Valley to determine the value of the area's natural resources. The 1747 census of the mission of Paniki included 470 residents of Bayombong and 213 from Bagabag, all said to be Gdang or Yogad. The substantial size of this Magat Valley Gdang population, more than 170 kilometers from present-day Ilagan City, may argue for a settlement that existed considerably longer than the 120-plus years since the Array revolt. The Gdang are mentioned in Spanish records again in connection with the late 1700s rebellion of Debu against the royal tobacco monopoly. Ilagan City was by then the tobacco industry's financing and warehousing center for the valley. Finally, royal reform and reorganization of the Cagayan government and economy began in 1839 with the creation of Nueva Vizcaya province. In 1865, Isabela province was created from parts of Cagayan and Nueva Vizcaya. The new administrations opened Cagayan Valley lands to large-scale agricultural concerns funded by Spanish, Chinese, and wealthy Central Luzon investors, and attracted workers from all over Luzon. Today, descendants of those 19th-century immigrants outnumber the descendants of the Cagayan Valley's Aboriginal Gdang, Ibanag, and Yogad peoples by nearly 7 to 1. American occupation. An early official reference to the Gdang during the American occupation directs the reader to Igorot. The writer discusses these non-Christian mountain tribes. Under the Igorot we may recognize various subgroup designations, such as Gdang, Dadayag, or Mayuya. These groups are not separated by tribal organization, since tribal organization does not exist among these people, but they are divided solely by slight differences of dialect. He also catalogues populations of the Cagayan lowlands, and says, Ilocano have also migrated still further south into the secluded valley of the Upper Magat. which constitutes the beautiful but isolated province of Nueva Vizcaya. The bulk of the population here, however, differs very decidedly from nearly all of the Christian population of the rest of the archipelago. It is made up of converts from two of the mountain Igorot tribes, who still have numerous pagan representatives in this province and Isabela. These are the Izane and Gdang. In 1632 the Spaniards established a mission in this valley, named Itwi, and led to the establishment of Aratao, Dupax, and Bambang, inhabited by the Christianized Isne, and of Biombong, Bagabag, and Ibong, inhabited by the Christianized Gdang. The population, however, has not greatly multiplied, the remainder of the Christianized population being made up of Ilocano immigrants. When the U.S. took the Philippines from the Spanish in 1899, they instituted what President McKinley termed a benign administration. Governance by the military energetically promoted improvements, many of which remain relevant today. The army built roads, bridges, hospitals, and public buildings, improved irrigation and farm production, constructed and staffed schools on the U.S. model, and invited missionary organizations to establish colleges. Most important, these improvements affected the entire country, not just primarily the environs of the capital. The infrastructure improvements made great changes in the lives of the Christianized Gdang in Nueva Vizcaya and Isabela, although they still had a much smaller effect on the Gdang in the mountains. In 1908, the Mountain Province Administrative District was formed, incorporating the municipality of Natonan, and its barangay of Paracelis on the upper reaches of the Malog River, as well the Ifugao municipality of Alfonso Lista uphill from San Mateo, Isabela. These areas were the home of the Gdang-speaking Aray and Baloan peoples, mentioned in the early census as non-Christian Gdang. A particular effort of the new province's administration was the suppression of headhunting. In 1901, the U.S. Army began to recruit counter-insurgency troops in the Philippines. A number of Gdang took advantage of this opportunity, and joined the Philippine Scouts through the late 1930s. The Scouts were deployed at the Battle of Bataan, so most were not in the homelands during the Japanese occupation. One Gdang 26th Cavalry Private, Jose P. Tugab, is said to have fought in Bataan, escaped to China on a Japanese ship, was with Chiang Kai-shek at Chungking and U.S. Anzac forces in New Guinea, and returned to help free his own Philippine home. Japanese occupation. On December 10, 1941, elements of the Japanese 14th Army landed at Apari, Cagayan, and marched inland to take Tuguegarao. The hapless regular Philippine Army units surrendered or fled. The main Japanese force proceeded to Ilocos Norte along the coast. They also deployed troops throughout the Cagayan Valley to administer the agriculturally rich area to facilitate Japanese expropriation of the food supplies. By the end of 1942, food and other commodities had become scarce for the native residents. Philippine Army escapees hid in the mountains of valley villages. Many became irregulars in small-scale guerrilla actions against the Japanese. In 1942, Americans Lt. Colonel Martin Moses and Amt. Lt. Colonel Arthur Noble remained at large. They attempted to organize a coordinated Northern Luzon guerrilla action in mid-October. Communications failed, and the attacks were unsuccessful. The Japanese occupying forces in the Cagayan Valley took this activity seriously. They imported thousands of troops fresh from the capture of Manila and Battle of Bataan, and crushed the resistance in a fierce and indiscriminate manner. The leaders were killed or captured, civilians were robbed, tortured, and massacred, their towns and barrios were destroyed. Still, in the midst of these hard times for North Luzon, many individual Japanese sought to befriend Filipino residents, and married local women. The Manila government of President Laurel, with many of the Philippines' wealthy families, encouraged collaboration with the Japanese. Unsurrendered American Captain Russell Volkman reorganized the guerrilla resistance into the United States Army forces in the Philippines, North Luzon, with a focus on gathering intelligence. In the valleys, his native forces were more effective at this new task, although they ran great risks, and provided General MacArthur with important information about Japanese troop dispositions. In 1945, the resistance also coordinated their activities with American invasion plans, fighting in the Cagayan Valley, in which Northern Luzon guerrillas had a recognized impact, included the Battle of Balid Pass that opened the main drive down the Magat Valley, the destruction bridges on the Bagabag-Bontoc Road, which cut off supply for General Yamashita's forces in the mountains, and the drive from Cervantes to Mankayan, which helped reduce the Japanese final stronghold at Kiangan. Post-World War II, the Commonwealth of the Philippines was established as an independent nation by the Treaty of Manila on July 4, 1946. The population of the Philippines at independence was fewer than 18 million. By 2014, the Philippine census is expected to reach 100 million and is forecast to be 200 million in the next 40 years. Even after losing large numbers of Filipino permanent emigrants to other countries, the population change has had two effects on the lowland Gdang. Enormous numbers of people from other parts of the country have relocated to the relatively uncrowded Magat, Cagayan valleys, overwhelming the original population and regional resources to accommodate and integrate them, while many educated Gdang have emigrated and become permanent residents of the US, Canada, and other countries in Southeast Asia. In October 1997, the national legislature passed the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. The National Commission on Indigenous Peoples recognizes the Gdang as one of the protected groups. Initially, there was uncertainty about which peoples were included. However, in May 2014, the Gdang were recognized as an indigenous people with political structure, with a certification presented by NCIP Commissioner Leonor Quintero. Starting in 2014, the process of delineation and titling the ancestral domains will be undertaken. The claims are expected to cover parts of the municipalities of Bambang, Baombong, Bagabag, Solano, Diadi, Quezon, and Villaverde. Culture, ethnography. Although consistently identifying the Gdang as a distinct group, historic sources have done a poor job of ethnography. Early Spanish records make little mention of customs of the Ibanajik and Igadangik peoples, being almost entirely concerned by events and government, church efforts at replacing the culture with the colonial model. In the 1901 Philippine Commission report states, from Nueva Vizcaya the towns make the common statement that there are no papers preserved which relate to the period of the Spanish government, as they were all destroyed by the revolutionary government. American occupation records are more descriptive and available, but the correspondents were also pursuing an agenda for change and consequently performed only cursory discovery of existing behaviors and historic customs. Highlands culture. Many popular writers on culture are enamored of the more exotic Highlands-Gdang culture, and pay little attention to the more numerous assimilated Christianized families. This follows the initial American assumption that the lowland Gdang originated with the Highlands groups who were subsequently Christianized and then settled in established valley communities. Many of the writers also seem to distinguish these residents of Ifugao and Apayao from other mountain tribes primarily by their dress customs. This has not been the case with Professor of Anthropology Ben J. Wallace, who has lived among and written extensively about Highland Gdang since the 1960s. Both men and women lead and participate in religious and social rituals. Some traditional Highlands Gdang men practice a ritual similar to potlatch in order to bring prestige to the family, economy and occupation. There does not seem to have been a Cagayan Valley analogue of the wealthy central Luzon landowner class until the agricultural expansion of the late 19th century. Most of those wealthy Filipinos were of Ilocano or Chinese ancestry. Present-day Gdang don't keep a memory of a dependent class. Records do show many Gdang names as land and business owners. The Catholic Church also offered career opportunities. Gdang residents of Baombong and Bagabag enthusiastically availed themselves of the expanded education opportunities in the early 20th century, producing a number of doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, and other professionals by the mid-1930s. A number also enlisted in the U.S. military service as a career. Status of women. Among lowlands Gdang, women regularly own and inherit property. They run businesses, pursue educational attainment, and often serve in public elected leadership roles. Well-known and celebrated writer Edith Lopez Tiempo was born in Baombong of Gdang descent. Is mentioned above. There appear to be no prevailing rules of exogamy or endogamy which affect women's status or treatment. Both men and women acquire status by marriage, but there are acceptable pathways to prestige for single women in the church, government, and business. Kinship, as has been documented with other Indo-Malay peoples. Gdang kin relationships are highly ramified and recognize a variety of prestige markers based on both personal accomplishment and obligation. Funerary practice. Modern Christian Gdang are most commonly entombed in a public or private cemetery, following a mass celebration and a procession. A wake is held for several days, allowing family members and friends travel time to view the corpse. Mummification is not usually practiced. Language. The Gdang language is related to Ibanag, Yogad, Atawis, Malasig and others. It is distinct in that it features phonemes not present in many neighboring Philippine languages. There are also notable differences from other languages in the distinction between R and L, and the F sound is a voiceless bilabial fricative, and not the fortified P sound common in many Philippine languages. The Spanish-derived J sound has become a plosive. Gdang is noteworthy for common use of doubled consonants. Gdang is declensionally, conjugationally and morphologically agglutinative, and is characterized by a dearth of positional, directional, adpositional adjunct words. Temporal references are usually accomplished using agglutinated nouns or verbs. Folk traditions. 300 years of Spanish cultural domination have effectively eradicated any useful pre-colonial artistic and musical legacy of the lowland Cagayan peoples, including the Gdang. Although the arts of the Cordillerans and the islanders south of Luzon are well researched, even 60 years of strong national and academic interest has failed to uncover tangible pre-Spanish Cagayan Valley traditions in music, plastic, or performing arts that understood. There does exist considerable documentation of Gdang interest and participation in Luzon-wide colonial traditions, such as Pandango si Ilor, Kampasasa and Pasyon. Most Gdang seem fond of riddles and puns, and keep the dialect alive with traditional songs. Stories of ghosts and witchcraft are also popular, with the tellers most often relating them as if these were events in which they themselves had participated. Finally, the Christian Gdang retain a strong traditional belief in illness with a supernatural origin, and some families practice healing traditions which were documented by Father Godfrey Lambrecht, CICM, in Santiago during the 1950s.